In today's video, we're going to be talking about a true story of a woman known as Nell Cropsey, who disappeared and was later found murdered. It's said that Nell still lurks her old house. The House of 7 Pines is now referred to as the Nell Cropsey House. The house is a big, beautiful house in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, near the Pascatank River. On November 20th, 1901, a terrifying tragedy would take place. A woman named Ella Maud Cropsey, nicknamed Nell, would mysteriously disappear. It would later be determined that around 11 p.m. that evening, she decided to step out of her house onto her front porch to talk to her boyfriend named Jim Wilcox. That would be the last time anyone saw her alive. Nell's family, who originally lived in New York, had moved to an area of Elizabeth, North Carolina, 3 years earlier. It wasn't long after their arrival that she and her sister would meet 2 young local men, and one was the son of a sheriff. Nell and Jim Wilcox had been dating for over 2 years now, and Nell was adamant on getting married. But it's believed that Wilcox didn't necessarily want that for himself. This was now becoming a continuous argument between the couple, and 3 years would be a long engagement in those days. So Nell, understandably, became restless to move things along more quickly. It was at this time Wilcox began to be growing concerned about her flirting with new men, presumably in her attempt to get him to feel jealous. On the night she disappeared, Wilcox had asked her to accompany him outside so that the two of them can talk. The family said that they heard what sounded like a disagreement taking place between them outside, though they could not hear the words being said. Later, Ollie, Nell's sister, said that after Nell had gone outside, she had heard a loud thud, but at the time, she had not thought any more of it. Her parents later said they believed the couple had made up by the end of the evening. When Ollie's boyfriend, who had been visiting, said he was gonna go home to bed, she asked him to check that her sister and boyfriend were okay on the porch. Her boyfriend quickly returned to tell her that they were no longer there. They were completely gone, nowhere to be found. Her sister presumed that because things may have become heated between them, that they had maybe taken a walk together to straighten things out. So at this point, she wasn't too concerned about them disappearing. Ollie, who shared a room with Nell, said that at about 12:30 or 1 a.m., she woke up and saw that her sister was not in bed. The neighbor could be heard shouting that someone was trying to steal their pig. The whole family woke up and rushed downstairs, noticing Nell still hadn't returned home. The fearful family searched around the house until all were crying. Then they noticed Wilcox's umbrella beside the door. They found no pig thief on their property, but they also didn't see Nell or Wilcox. Very concerned about their daughter's absence, the father called the police, who would arrive shortly after. Then they went to the Wilcox household. At about 2 a.m., they brought Wilcox back to the house. Ollie said her mom went over and took hold of his arm and said, "Jim, for my sake and for your mother's sake, tell me where Nell is." Jim answered, "I could swear that I could not say where she is. I left her on the porch. I could swear and kiss a Bible I don't know. I left her on the porch crying." He told the police that he had been home since around midnight, and his father, the sheriff, concurred. He said he had left Nell's house, gone for a quick drink at the local bar, then went home to go to bed. He said that he had broken up with Nell and he had handed her back a photograph of herself she had given him. This photo he spoke about was never found. The police were suspicious of Wilcox and his version of events, and with no sign of Nell, they decided to arrest him and hold him in the county jail. They had a strong feeling that there had been more to this story. In the meantime, a search party was organized to search for the missing young woman. 3 weeks later, Wilcox was still in prison, still sticking to his version of events, when a psychic called Madame Snell Newman contacted the family of Nell and told them that she knew where her body was. The psychic said she had visions of what happened that night, and she went on to tell them that Wilcox had used chloroform on the young woman to knock her unconscious. Then he had wrapped her body in a blanket and carried her deep into the countryside, where she would then be killed. She goes on to say that he dropped her body down an abandoned well. The police did a follow-up on this story and went to the location of any abandoned wells in the county and did a deep search of them. but found no body. A month after her disappearance, on the 24th of December, a letter arrived on the Cropseys' doorstep. The letter had no signature on it and no return address, but the letter came from New York. The anonymous letter said that Nell had not been killed by Wilcox, but by the man who had been attempting to steal the pig. The sender of the letter wrote that after Wilcox had left, Nell heard the noise out in the back in the pig pen and went around back to the house to investigate, where she then was met by the thief, and in his panic at being caught red-handed, he had attacked her, hitting her on the head with a blunt instrument. The letter continued to explain that her killer then carried off her dead body and dumped it in the river. The writer even drew a map of the exact location at the river where this was supposed to have taken place. A couple of days later, her mother was still canvassing the river trying to find her daughter's body when she saw a large white shape floating in the river. She quickly asked a nearby man in a boat to go towards the white shape, and to her utter disbelief, he returned with her daughter's lifeless body in his arms. The exact spot where her body was found was the exact spot pinpointed on the map of the anonymous letter. Her autopsy would later reveal that she had not died by drowning, but rather she had been killed by a sharp blow to the head and then placed into the water. For the police and local people too, this made them recall that Wilcox was known for carrying a blackjack. This was enough for the police to charge Wilcox with her murder. Presumably, they also had no other suspects. The so-called pig thief was nowhere to be found, and so to them, who else could have done it? Wilcox was sent to trial, and in court, he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. This sentence was then commuted on appeal to 30 years. After his conviction and imprisonment, the family felt it better to move away from the area for a fresh, clean start. Although they could never forget their loss, they believed the new area would not constantly remind them of her body dead in the river. Despite moving to a new area, the family was never the same. It's said that the young woman's mother went insane from grief and had to be institutionalized in an asylum. It is thought that it is very possible the restless spirit of the young murdered woman, her daughter, simply could not rest in peace after her young life had been tragically cut short. As for her sister, she became a recluse. Her brother unalived himself. Her sister's boyfriend also fell to the same doom a few years after the murder. It was being whispered that he had known what happened to Nell, that he witnessed Wilcox standing over her dead body, and that he had assisted Wilcox in getting rid of her body in the river. As for Wilcox himself, though he was set free after receiving a pardon a quarter of a century later, he found himself ostracized by everyone who lived in the area, and he could never shake their suspicion that a killer was now walking among them. He would turn to drinking to cope, and he also approached a book editor with an idea for them to write a book about what happened, perhaps with the hope of finally clearing his name and reputation in the eyes of all the locals. He would spend a couple of years with the writer, drafting the chapters of the book. 18 months later, he also unalived himself. The book's editor also died in a car accident. What is certain is that ever since the untimely death of Nell, death has followed in her path, an unexplainable amount of death. After these events, people began asking if Nell herself could be behind driving these men to their deaths. Now I want to know what you think about this video down below in the comments, and if you enjoyed it, give it a nice big thumbs up.